Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, the communication blackout and curfews in Indian-occupied Kashmir have entered their third month. Hospitals and healthcare services have been hit hard. A full-page report published on Monday in the New York Times tells a story of a young 22-year-old college student, Umar Dar, from Baramulla, a town a little west of Srinagar. Now, since schools and colleges are closed across the valley, Dar was out in the fields taking care of the sheep in an orchard when a poisonous snake bit him. His family wasn't able to call an ambulance. They went from hospital to hospital looking for the anti-venom that could have saved his life. And it would have saved them valuable hours if the phone network was up and running. They could have used the phone. Eventually, 22-year-old Umar Dar died, succumbing to the poison that took over his whole body. This is not the only case of innocent people losing their lives to the inhumane restrictions imposed by the Indian government. There are innumerable cases unfolding, and not all get reported by the media, which is already struggling under such severe restrictions that the Indian government has imposed in Jammu and Kashmir. We will be talking today about the aftershocks of these restrictions and how they have affected a community already at their wits' end, with a government that sees them as a threat. Let me introduce our panel experts. First of all, we will be talking to a Kashmiri who has just recently returned from his hometown back and come back to New Delhi. We have with us on the line Mr. Syed Nadeemul Hassan. You are right now situated in Delhi. Mr. Hassan, you've just been to your hometown in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Tell us a little about your visit, where exactly you went, and what is the situation like on the ground?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. I live in Srinagar, and my relatives live in parts of Budgam as well. So that I covered two districts, first of all. And as far as I saw, the normal routine, I mean, like the Indian media is showing right now, it is not there at all. I mean, schools are shut, all the businesses are shut. Normal day-to-day life is disturbed. I mean, few vehicular movement of private transport, you will see them on the roads, but apart from that, no public transport operates on the roads, which means in day-to-day lives, everybody suffers. I mean, you were mentioning the case regarding Mr. Dar who was bit by the snake. That is just one part of it. I mean, countless things happen every day which are not reported. The journalists on the ground, they are not allowed to go to the places and report. I mean, obviously with communications blockade, they can't obviously report anything. And as far as Indian media is concerned, I mean, they are just doing the things to show the outside world that things are getting better, which is not happening at all, like I said.
So, Mr. Hassan, you mentioned, sorry to interrupt you there, but you mentioned that you visited two different districts there. Let's talk a little about Srinagar to give an idea, because in order to understand how the situation is on a daily basis, in terms of how does one access local shops for basic necessities like food, for supplies, oil, vegetables, cooking gas? What reports we do have, they're conflicting. One side says there is no such shortage, and the other side says that it is absolutely impossible. What was your experience going there?
Now, the grocery shops which are in the market do operate in the evening for a few hours, and people do buy stuff from them. But like I said, the normal routine, if you want to eat something special, you can't do that. You have to just live with what is available in the market. Not everything is available in the market right now, and the demand is very high, and when the supply is short, people don't have much money left, because like I said, the businessmen are hit the hard. I mean, they don't have money to buy stuff. They're just buying the stuff which they find. And as far as demand and supply is concerned, that is obvious, and that is why people are suffering.
Now, Mr. Hassan, I want to ask you, you mentioned that businesses are hit. A recent report just surfaced where they talk about how $1.4 billion worth of business has been affected. The economy has been affected in Jammu and Kashmir, where thousands of jobs have also been lost.
Yes, I'll talk about myself. I was working in a private company and I was asked to resign because they seem no end to it. They can't be paying me for every month for no work. My friend, he has a business in Pulwama district. That is the most dangerous parts in Kashmir at the moment. and he has suffered a lot. He actually has businesses in Delhi, and he owes them money, which again is a state of worry he is in. So basically, I am a practical example of someone who was working in a private company and was asked to resign. And my friend is a businessman, and I'm seeing how much he is suffering right now.
When you see news coming out where U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen, where he came out and said that he was denied access to the valley by the Indian government, and then later on also committees have come out and said and talked about that this is an alarming situation. Let me just quote one. India's communication blackout in Kashmir is having a devastating impact on the lives and welfare of everyday Kashmiris. It's time for India to lift these restrictions and afford Kashmiris the same rights and privileges as any other Indian citizen. This was the HFAEC. Now, when you see the U.S. government members showing such concern, does it give you any hope that the situation might be addressed by the Indian government soon?
Well, first of all, the wise man said the first step to solve a problem is to realize there is one. As far as India is concerned, it's not a problem. Home Minister of India said a few days ago in one of his rallies that blocking communication and internet does not come under human rights. That is the Home Minister of India telling the people of India that it doesn't come under human rights. Now, as far as the people from around the world are concerned, obviously we're very thankful for them that they have raised their voices. But I don't understand. I mean, when America has to, wage wars in Afghanistan or Syria, or for that matter in any other country, they do it in a single go. Why is it hard for them, to intervene in this matter? That's because, like Imran Khan mentioned, India is a market right now, and not many countries are wanting to disturb the relations with India. That is basically the main reason not everybody is taking interest here. I am thankful, like I said, for the world leaders who are mentioning Kashmir in their speeches. But I don't understand why is not anything happening on the ground. We saw Imran Khan, we saw UN speech, Mr. Sanders, and sometimes Kamala Harris said as well, but nothing is happening on the ground. I mean, I don't understand why UN is not taking any action after so much pressure from world leaders. That is something which is beyond my head. And like I said, from the past 3 months, nothing has happened. For the first 2 months, Indian restrictions were there. Like I said, army personnel were on the roads. Right now, they want people to come out to show the Indian media or the Indian people or the world media that everything is normal in Kashmir. Sometimes they take pictures from somewhere else and will show you on the TV that the situation is getting normal in Kashmir, but nothing like that is happening because Kashmiris will not accept the fact that 370 is removed, come what may. That is not going to happen. I mean, they are not going to, console the Kashmiri people for that. That is not happening
Mr.
on the
Hassan,
ground.
a question you asked there about what is the UN General Assembly doing? What are the world leaders doing? I'd like to pose that question to a guest who's just joined us. Stay with us, Mr. Hassan. We have with us Major General Ijaz Awan, defense analyst and international relations expert. General, we're just talking to a Kashmiri who's returned from Srinagar. He's telling us about the difficulties that we have been seeing from international reports on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir. His question really is, what is going to happen next? Why isn't the world leadership doing anything effective? Why is there no change happening? What's your take on it?
Well, I think we need to understand one thing, that the world powers are driven by their self-interest, national interest, and they would only prefer, there is no morality as such in the real politics. So that is unfortunate reality, and we have to live with this. Look what has been happening about Palestine. There were so many resolutions passed, but Israel threw them out of the window, and yet nobody reacted to it. There were no sanctions. Sanctions are only imposed on weaker countries, poor countries where the big powers like America, and they are not siding. Unfortunately, India is having a sort of honeymoon with America with regards to containment of China, and the Pacific Command, they want cooperation from India. So because of this factor, India is not feeling that pressure, and they are not bringing that pressure deliberately upon India to make a change in their policy. For the international community, unfortunately, loss of 100, 200 or even few thousand people does not matter, and they would do what they wish to do.
So coming back to you, Mr. Hassan, hearing what the General had to say, the stakes are not high enough for the world leaders to take action here, irrespective of the fact that what has happened on the World Forum has been unprecedented, at least in the past 50 years. But do you think the announcements that are coming out from the Indian government that they will lift a travel advisory on the disputed region by Thursday, do you think that might be a small step towards the situation improving in Jammu and Kashmir?
Like I said, it's basically, we are demanding something else. We are demanding the restoration of Article 370. Is that going to happen? I don't see that coming. Until then, nothing is going to change in Kashmir. Come what may. Like I said, people are against it with their heart, and they won't accept it. India may do things from here and there. They may call tourists there, but that is not going to help them. It's basically a step which they will, show in international media that things are getting better one by one, but that's not going to happen. They will obviously show the world a different picture. But what's actually happening on the ground, they won't show it. The communication blockade is the first, step. If you're telling the world that nothing is happening in Kashmir, everything is normal, why is there a communication blockade? Okay. Why are not they allowing the international media in? Mm-hmm. That's clearly because they don't want the world to see the actual picture.
Right. Now right. Okay. So, Mr. Hassan, thank you so much. Let me come back to you, Major General. The situation as a Kashmiri who's just visited, who's lived there, who's lost his job as a result of the economy that's taken a huge hit in the Kashmir Valley. While you do believe that the world doesn't have much at stake here, the Kashmir issue in itself and the kind of across-the-border skirmishes Pakistan and India are seeing, doesn't it also pose a possible threat to regional instability that wouldn't be in the favor of world leaders at all at this point?
Well, that is what exactly Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khans, tried to convey to them, that the people of Kashmir are not going to accept the decision of revoking 370 and 35A. Their identity has been taken.
Thank you so much, Major General Ijaz Awan. And now to the conversation, I'd like to invite Dr. Taslim Ahmed Rehmani joining us from New Delhi. He's the National Secretary of SDPI. Dr. Rehmani, the conversation here essentially has been revolving so far on whether the world leadership has enough at stake when it comes to Indian-occupied Kashmir. But at the same time, I also want to bring to attention your comments on this, that there are more sentiments arising within India of minorities. For example, in Northeast India's largest sort of rebel outfit, which is estimated from anywhere 5,000, 15,000 members, I'm talking about Nagaland, have already come out and said that they are very disappointed with how the Indian government has handled the Kashmir issue. Is this setting a precedent for more sentiments of minorities coming forth?
You see, I always maintain the view that the real issue has opened the Pandora box elsewhere in the country, and the most potential part of the country is Northeast, particularly the Nagaland. Very recently proposed Citizenship Amendment Bill, which is to be passed in the Parliament in our next session, that has been taken as an offense act to be covering, and even the Hindus living over there, the Bengali Hindus and the other Hindu communities, the tribal communities, they are not taking it in a positive spirit. Even the Chief Minister of those states has warned the present government, particularly the Amit Shah, our Home Minister, that he shall not play with the fire. And it is bound to get negative reactions, maybe the public uprising, etc., against it, because through this NRC and most connected with the Citizenship Amendment Bill, actually the government is trying to change the demography or in such areas where the tribals or the Christian population or the bulk Muslim population are living. They want to change the demography of all those areas, which will certainly affect the northeastern region in a bad manner. So they want not to change their cultural identity, their regional identity, and their tribal identity, which can be overpowered by the Hindu sentiment, the Sanatan Hindu sentiment. That's what the BJP is planning, and the RSS has an age-old agenda about it. For last 50 years, they are working in those areas to affect those demographic changes. That's why they are perturbed, and they don't. Even the Assamese, the chief minister of Assam did not speak, though he is a BJP person, but he did not speak about in favor of RC or the Citizenship Amendment. Because the movement of Assam was not actually about the Hindu or Muslim issue, it was about the regional sentiment and regional autonomy. And they call it the Assamese Samita, Assamese nationalism. So they don't call Jai Shri Ram or they don't call Bharat Mata Ki Jai, rather they call the Aham Mata Ki Jai. So those Hindus in Assam, which has the Assamese original Assami inhabitant Hindus, they don't like any such amendment so that the Bengali Hindus shall live over there.
Right.
So this is the reality behind the NRC and the Citizenship Amendment.
No, while you highlight that, Dr. Rehmani, let me also, you're talking about, as you earlier mentioned, a Pandoras box. You're talking about essentially 7 northeastern states that are protected under very similar article, very similar to Article 370 that Indian occupied Kashmir was, had a special status under Article 371. These 7 states are. But let me ask you this right now: what the sentiment is, while the BJP-led government is pushing this Hindutva right-wing policy and subjugating minorities, is there a real threat to the government or being upstaged by the sentiments on the ground?
Yeah, they are feeling endangered by that. If the three do anything like that of 370, but those things are short. Whether the 370 has a future or not. After this NRC and Citizenship Amendment bill is passed in the Parliament, that the 370 will be endangered the most. That's why I said the process of balkanization of this region has been started through the Kashmir issue. Because if the ultimate plan of Kashmir is that maybe RSS has maintained that they want to get rid of Srinagar and want to retain more territory. So it will be a process of disintegration of the country. And after, there are Sikh movements which are raising continuously. And then the northeast, the Nagas have already reached an accord with the government of India.
Okay, Dr. Rehmani, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've come to the point where we've got to take a quick short break. Don't go away. We'll be right back with more news stories. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now, we were talking about Jammu and Kashmir earlier on, but right now we're going to be speaking to our guest, Maram Susli, an analyst joining us and an activist joining us from Perth, Australia, to talk essentially about the situation as it unfolds between Turkish forces threatening to attack northeastern side of Syria and the storm of angry tweets that the US President Donald Trump is lashing out, warning Turkey that they can obliterate Ankara's economy if they go off limits. Of course, he's referring to a warning to Turkey not to touch the Kurds, who have been supporting, the US has been supporting the fight against ISIS in Syria. To get a handle on what is unfolding and how to see between the lines of what is actually being said and what is actually being meant, we have here Ms. Susli. Welcome to Newswire once again, Maram Susli. What's your take on the latest developments? A lot of hot air from US President Donald Trump, or is this relationship with Ankara no longer as relevant, as valuable as we saw during the whole S-400 debacle?
Well, this is a scenario we faced actually about 9-10 months ago when Trump said he was going to pull out of Syria, and then he got so much pressure from within his own government and the opposition that he had to cave in. And since that time, not much has changed for the US strategically in Syria. The only thing that had changed was the Syrian military had gained more territory in Idlib. And during that time, their relationship with Turkey became more and more tenuous because of their support for the Kurdish groups. And these Kurdish groups, the YPG or the SDF, are connected with the PKK, which the US regards as a terrorist organization, as does Turkey. And they're afraid for their national security. So for the United States, they are kind of in a predicament now where they cannot really make the right decision in terms of their agenda, because if they choose the Kurds, then they will lose their NATO ally Turkey. And if they choose Turkey, they will lose the Kurds. And of course, Turkey has one of the biggest militaries in NATO, and they are a far more valuable ally than the Kurds. The only reason why they would choose the Kurds is because of pressure from the Israeli lobby, who really want to see a Kurdistan in the region.
Right. So, you mentioned yourself that this has been going on for 9-10 months. It was, I believe, in December where the US President Donald Trump came out and said, we're withdrawing troops. And even now, recently in his tweets, he's mentioned that how his election campaign earlier on was based on pulling back US soldiers, troops from these endless, senseless wars. But at the same time, where he's threatening Turkey with economic obliteration, it really contradicts. So keeping that in mind also, there's a lot of resistance within the US against President Trump's approach to this troop withdrawal. Why do you think there is that resistance?
The reason why he's making these contradictory tweets is because of the resistance. He's trying to act tough against Turkey to placate those people that are saying, oh, you are weak against Turkey, Turkey is going to attack the Kurds, etc., etc. And this is his way of opposing them. The reality is, of course, that the US is not going to stay in Syria permanently. This is a ludicrous suggestion. The best they can do is try to delay their inevitable withdrawal. And they envisaged that they would be able to carve out a separate state in Syria. This is not going to happen. So basically, the longer they stay in Syria, the more money and time and connection with Turkey they're going to lose, because Turkey is moving closer and closer to Russia. Trump sees this. However, he's getting resistance from within the US because the Zionist lobby is very strong in the United States, and they see a Kurdistan project as their baby, because they feel that if they can separate Syria from Iraq and Iran and cut off Syria from its own oil fields, which are in the Kurdish-controlled regions, then they can weaken the Syrian state to such a point that it can no longer rebuild itself or ever threaten them in any way. And that's why there's so much pushback, because of such a strong Zionist lobby in the United States. Of course, the whole idea that the Kurds are going to be annihilated by Turkey could be prevented if the Kurds were to ally themselves with Damascus and the Syrian army and let the Syrian army go in and defend its own territory.
So tell us what your take is on then how Russia plays a role here, because what we saw on Monday, where we saw the US Secretary of Defense Mark Esper also go meet his counterpart Sergei Shoigu, and we don't have details yet or what the conversation was essentially about. But in your opinion, how does Russia play into this dynamic?
Well, traditionally, or like at least in the 80s, it was the US who was calling the Kurdish separatist movement a terrorist movement, and Russia who was backing the PKK. And since the war in Syria, the Kurds have decided to ally themselves with the US rather than Russia. So Russia feels they have far less to gain from, supporting Kurdish separatist movements.
Right.
So instead, it has it would much prefer to be allied with Turkey, which is very close to its borders, and to push Turkey as much as possible away from NATO. Of course, NATO was created to isolate Russia to oppose Warsaw, the Warsaw Pact, which is no longer in existence. So what Russia's position in this is to try to drag Turkey away from the US, which of course puts pressure on the US to pull out of Syria.
And also, what Turkey is, and there are some reports coming out from regional local media from the Middle East talking about that airstrikes by Turkey have taken place. And international news reporting is saying that, well, the Kurds are saying they will become human shields to protect their land. So this seems like as if there is the region is in great peril, and lots of hundreds and thousands of human lives are right now at the point of being lost. Is the world leadership in any way showing any concern, any active resistance to stop this escalation?
Well, I find this really ironic and hypocritical, because for the last few years, the Kurdish SDF and YPG have been systematically ethnically cleansing other minorities in the region. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch even reported about the Arab villages that the SDF were burning. Syrian organizations have been condemning the Kurdish groups for enacting a law that would prevent people from returning to their homes and allow Kurds to occupy those homes. There's already been this ethnic cleansing that's been happening, but it's been conducted by the US-backed Kurds, so nobody really seems to care about it. What will happen if Turkey attacks Syria, which it already is occupying a region of Syria? We could take, for example, the experiment that happened when the Turks went to Afrin. Now, had the Kurdish groups been allowed to accept help from the Syrian army, then Turkey would not have invaded. And the Syrian army would have been able to control Afrin, and nobody would have been moved out of their homes. Now, if the same scenario plays out in the northeast of Syria, we're facing basically the same situation and the same question when it comes to the Kurds and the US.
And there's also a concern that if Turkey makes this move in Syria against the Kurds, and there isn't any active resistance, because there was a deal essentially with the US that it seems that they backed out of in creating that buffer zone, in allowing those excess of refugees within Turkey to be repatriated to the tune of 3.6 million people we're talking about. So all of that goes away and Turkey attacks. Is there a chance that the Islamic State, the very reason that the US backed the Kurds, would be bolstered in the region?
Absolutely not. There is not going to be any more ISIS. I mean, the Kurdish groups have been threatening to release ISIS prisoners to the number of 3,200 as a sort of bargaining chip to try to force the US to stay. But if the Syrian military, again, is able to go northeast into Syria, there's no way that they will allow ISIS to regain control there. I mean, the Syrian military has been fighting both Al-Qaeda and ISIS while under attack by the US and under US sanctions. So they're more than capable to prevent ISIS from returning. And the idea that, the international community have to do anything, sure they do. They could be actively trying to force both the US and Turkey to get out of Syria, which would be which would be correct under international law. That's what needs to happen here. If the international community is going to do anything, is to enforce international law and respect the sovereignty of Syria.
Okay. All right, Ms. Maram Susli, so much for your time and your opinion here on the situation as it unfolds. And we'll keep you up to date with that. But we must take a quick short break. And when we're back, we will have the update on Pakistan's Prime Minister's visit to China. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire. We will be now talking about Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan's visit in Beijing, China. He's arrived today to discuss not just the security situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir with his Chinese counterpart, but also to discuss various other matters in terms of investments and business and economy there with investors as well as senior leadership of the Chinese government. Now, we have our correspondent in Beijing, Mr. Patrick, who is going to update us. Mr. Falk, tell us a little about what has happened so far today with the Prime Minister Imran Khan's visit.
Well, details have been a little bit sketchy, but as far as we understand, Prime Minister Khan met with Li Keqiang today, and he spoke at the China Business Forum. He is meant to be attending a banquet later on today, and will be meeting with the presidency tomorrow. And of course, the focus of this visit is very much on economic cooperation, but also on security matters. And we'll be watching very closely indeed to Prime Minister Khan's meeting with presidency tomorrow.
Now, Mr. Falk, tell us a little also about what Prime Minister Imran Khan talked about. What are some of the key points in his speech that he gave just earlier today?
Well, it's really very much about reassuring China that CPEC projects are still moving ahead as planned, but also outlining some of the business opportunities that Pakistan affords China. And one of the things that the CPEC's really very much about is demonstrating to the world that a high-quality BRI project. So that is certainly something that he wants to assure the Chinese government that it is getting on track. There has been talk about CPEC, of course, slowing down. But also we heard on Sunday from Planning Minister Kuro Bakhtar, who insisted that certainly wasn't the case, and Pakistan is in fact here to expand on some of the CPEC projects. And he talked about other projects that could be opening up as well, including hydroelectric projects, as well as LNG and steel mill projects as well.
Also, Mr. Falk, while he was speaking today to the China Council for of International Trade, he mentioned quite a few points about how China's history shows lessons that he would like to emulate, especially in terms of corruption, eliminating poverty. What was the kind of reaction you were sensing from the crowd, from those present, on what Prime Minister Khan was saying?
Well, certainly these are things that would have appealed to the crowds that were present. And as we know, China and Pakistan have had a very long-standing friendship. And the Foreign Ministry said prior to the visit that this is very much a continuation of the long-established tradition of the two countries meeting regularly and consulting with one another on issues of bilateral, regional, international, mutual interest.
Okay, so stay with us, Mr. Falk. We'll get more updates as we go along. But let me also bring here another guest here, Mr. Einar Tangen, in Analysts, joining us from Beijing. Welcome to the show. Mr. Tangen, in your opinion, this comes at a very critical time, clearly, for relations between not just Pakistan and China, but India, and also what has been an ongoing negotiation between the US and China over the trade war that's been going on for over a year now. In your opinion, what is the dynamic in play right now? What is the priority here for both countries, Pakistan and China, as they come forth?
Well, I think they're a little bit different. I mean, China is obviously a bit preoccupied with what's happening with Donald Trump's idea of the world. And I think for Pakistan, it's, we're looking at a certain amount of economic uncertainty. And I think there's a desire to get support from Beijing, obviously. There is concerns about CPEC. I know that people say it's on track and they want to expand it. But at this point, there are some deliverables, some projects that were expected to be finished, and they have not been finished yet. So movement along that kind of axis will help a lot in terms of getting further support from Beijing.
And also, Mr. Tangen, it comes at a time where the Chinese leadership, the Chinese officials have yet to announce a visit that had been planned earlier on of President Xi to India for an informal visit, a summit outside Chennai. So is this coinciding to the narrative that has been circulating by analysts that China is trying to do more, or at least Pakistan's concerns are not being addressed by China in terms of the reaction it's showing to India's actions in Jammu and Kashmir?
As I said, I mean, China's main concern in this area is about peace and stability. They have trade on one hand, and they're very, very keen to diffuse any kind of situation. The whole thing with Kashmir took them completely by surprise. as was foretold by their reaction to it. So at this point, China, is trying to assure an old friend that they want to continue. They're interested in actual physical progress on the Belt and Road Initiative projects in the Kashmir area. But, it's very difficult. India is showing signs that it wants to, negotiate a little bit. There's some speculation that there will be some military exercises in the next short period, and then after that there will be an announcement about the specifics of the visit by Modi. Clearly, I think Prime Minister Khan is trying. Mr. Khan is trying to make sure that he's in there and knows exactly what's going to be happening with India as it goes forward.
Okay, so Mr. Falk, let me ask a similar question here. Did you get a sense of, or was there any conversation in terms of, while they did talk about Prime Minister Khan and talk about the security situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir, but the concerns that analysts say Islamabad has that China isn't reacting strongly enough to India's actions? Were they coming across, or was there a conversation about this?
Well, I can't say whether or not there were any conversations about it specifically, but certainly the visit has two essential parts to it. On the one hand, to try and reassure that CPEC plans are on track. On the other hand, really very much to try and leverage support from China over Jammu and Kashmir. And of course, a lot has been made about the timing of this visit coming ahead of this planned visit by President Xi Jinping to India for this informal meeting with Prime Minister Modi. And certainly I imagine that the Prime Minister would be hoping that the points that he made over Pakistan's economic and trade relations with China will have resonated and perhaps encouraged China to speak up on Pakistan's behalf. But China will be very weary indeed about getting too involved because it also has its interests with India with regards to its economic and trade ties with the country.
Okay, so Mr. Tangen, coming back to you on this kind of a predicament that China seems to be involved in. You talked about how it's already got a lot on its plate, especially in terms of what has been happening with the US over trade, and that's been going on for over a year. What can we expect moving forward in the next few months, especially as Pakistan continues to push their diplomatic stance on Indian-occupied Kashmir, trying to highlight the issue and try to get as many allies to support it on pressurizing India?
Well, I mean, it's really a PR war at this point, and I think China is trying to balance this. Obviously, they want regional peace. They do not want Kashmir exploding. They're going to be very consistent in telling people to, let's be calm and let's be rational and let's talk this out. We don't need to have more instability in the region. I think that's everybody's desire, but let's make sure that everybody is following through on that.
And the concerns also, besides what China wants peace and stability, like you said, in the region, coming back to other concerns about investments within Pakistan. Prime Minister Imran Khan, in his speech to the council there, talked about how he wants the Chinese investors to profit from their investments within Pakistan. The concerns of security and the project's delay, what is the sense within China about these concerns?
Well, as I said, I mean, there's no overall concern. What it is very specific deliverables. There were supposed to be certain things that were built and they were supposed to be online at this point, and they're not. So the Chinese feel that things have kind of lagged off. I think there's a perception that things are cooling down. I would disagree with that in the sense that China is as wedded as ever to the Belt and Road Initiative. Mm-hmm. If you start looking at where Chinese tourists are now spending their dollars, it's Belt and Road countries. If you start looking at the amount of trade that's been lost with the U.S., where is it going? It's going to Belt and Road countries. So there's no let up from the Chinese side in terms of what they believe is necessary to go forward. They're just looking for some reassurance, and I mean not words, deeds, that these projects are in fact getting finished.
Right, and this visit of Prime Minister Khan also comes just a few days before when the Financial Action Task Force is expected to decide whether Pakistan's efforts to clamp down on terrorist funding has been efficient and effective. Do you think this is also playing a part in how this visit is panning out?
No, I don't think so. If there are any concerns about that, these are going to be addressed in private, and I'm sure they would have been telegraphed quite some time ago. China would be anxious to see Pakistan in a good light, especially in this regard. This is all part of, this kind of fighting against terrorism. So I think they expect that Pakistan has done what is necessary to do it and would be happy to support it. The U.S. And Europe, it'll depend on how they see the same facts, what it is. I cannot see the U.S. being terribly friendly about this, given the things. But on the other hand, Donald Trump is a bit preoccupied these days.
He is indeed. Mr. Paul, coming back to you, let me address recently on Saturday, in fact, there was when India launched a strong protest against China over comments by the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan on this Kashmir dispute, on the words he used, on him saying that we will stand by Pakistan. That being a concern right now, is it a conversation that is also affecting the meetings that are taking place during Prime Minister Khan's visit?
Well, it's not the first time that China has voiced its support to Pakistan over the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. But I wouldn't imagine that it necessarily has any impact on the discussions that are going on here. Although, as we've said before, China will be wanting, as we heard, to try and balance its interests with India and at the same time keep friendly relations with Pakistan.
Okay, so tell us a little about what the next days are going to look like, or at least tomorrow is going to look like for Prime Minister Khan's visit to Beijing.
Well, during his visit, he has already met Premier Li Keqiang today, and we are told that he will be entertained at separate banquets. Presumably, that will be after his meeting with President Xi Jinping tomorrow. We are also told that he will be attending the meeting with President Xi, accompanied by the head of Pakistan's army. So that's an indication that the focus tomorrow may very well be much more on issues related to security. So perhaps there has been a little bit of thought process behind the itinerary coming here, in that today the focus is very much on economics and trade between the two countries, and tomorrow perhaps Prime Minister Khan will have hoped that these things resonated with the Chinese president and will open up an opportunity to discuss these security matters.
All right. Thank you so much, Patrick Falk, joining us from Beijing. Coming back to you quickly, we're running out of time. Mr. Tangen, what we're understanding right now, speaking to our correspondent, speaking to you, the conversation essentially, and also referring to a press conference that Pakistan's Minister for Development and Planning gave, Mr. Bakhtiar, talking about there was no slowdown of CPEC projects. It seems the conversation essentially right now that is being focused on is the very important Belt and Road Initiative. So do you feel that maybe this visit would assuage concerns that Chinese investors might have regarding that?
No, it's not the words at this point. It's really the actions. They just want to see these projects going forward. If they see progress, that's all they need to do. It's not about giving speeches or assurances. It's really just deliverables. But China is completely dedicated to the Belt and Road Initiative. There's still no change on that. Pakistan is still regarded as a friend. It's this issue of how you balance everything in this area, try to keep peace and promote prosperity.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Tangen, joining us from Beijing, talking about Prime Minister Khan's visit to Beijing, talking about what was discussed there by Prime Minister Khan, where he, in his speech to a Chinese Council of Investors, talked about how addressing corruption is a big issue in Pakistan, and they are emulating lessons learned from Chinese history, and many other issues and concerns were brought up, that CPEC projects are on track, they are going forward, and that it was in the interest of Pakistan for it to be a profitable investment venture for the Chinese. Well, that's all the time we have for today. We will be seeing you tomorrow with a new and fresh stories developing around the world from myself and the team. Goodbye for now.